Absolutely. All right. And we'll kick her off in 3, 2. We are back. You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and joining me once again, Kevin Durso. How are you, buddy?
Doing well. How are you?
Doing good. We're, getting into those summer show vibes, watching some playoff hockey. We're closing in on the draft, free agency. It's about to be a busy couple of weeks, but as of right now, nothing too crazy going on in Flyerland. There was a press conference as of this recording this morning, Wednesday morning. Dan Hilferty and Keith Jones had a press availability. We'll talk about that. We'll get into the playoff recap, the preview for the Stanley Cup Final, all of that. As we dive into it here today, follow us on social media at YWT Podcast. Follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso. Find us everywhere you find your podcasts, including sportstalkphilly.com. So we're starting with the Flyers news kind of right off the top. There's not a whole lot, not even as much rumor and innuendo as last show here. Pretty simple. Dan Hilferty, Keith Jones made themselves available to the media this morning. Kevin, tell us about it. What did we get?
I mean, not a ton, because they're not the people that I think everybody wants to hear from in terms of roster construction. It's not their job completely. Actually, and I didn't even put this in the article I did on the presser, but one of the interesting things that Keith Jones said in regards to Danny Briere is, I'm not his boss, we're partners, which is interesting. So in other words, that's kind of a, look, I'm here to help when Danny says he wants some help and wants me to facilitate something, but it's Danny's show when it comes to building the team.
And if you know Keith Jones, that can't come as much of a surprise. That's
sure
very much his management style.
Yeah, and so there were a couple of kind of nothing points out of this whole thing, as you would expect. Not that there was much to speculate on this, but Dan Hilferty opened with a statement and basically backed the entire management group, backed what Keith Jones does, backed what Danny Briere has done, backed John Tortorella. Now, we knew that already anyway.
Yeah.
There's not really much. There's not really much to talk about with it. You just take, all the stuff that he's had to talk about, whatever. A lot was made about the timing of this, kind of so what's the point of having Dan Hilferty and Keith Jones speak now versus 6 weeks ago? Let's say it was a week after the season ended. Even then, it would have still made some sense.
Or at any time in between, really. Why now?
Well, I think because the interesting part of that asking that question is to do it into June now. I mean, if we go back far enough, I believe at around this time last year, the Stanley Cup Final was going on, and we were hearing from the likes of Danny Briere because they were making a trade.
Right.
They were actually doing off-season work. There's really their only off-season work to this point has been the Fedotov contract. That's about it. There's a lot of talk about some of the other stuff that they're going to do, and a lot of the beyond the rumors of the one player in particular that everybody really wants to know about what's going on. There's a lot of talk about Travis Konechny, as expected. He's probably they basically have said he's probably the priority at this point. Extending him long term is probably the priority, and that is what it is. So it just seemed like there were people who kind of tried to get it into their kind of almost create the narrative that, well, the only reason they could possibly want to have a press conference is because they know something we don't know, and it's going to be an announcement. And it really isn't an announcement. It was just done end of season media availability.
Well, and just to touch on that, because obviously the rumor is always Michkov. Keith Jones was very careful with his words, essentially saying that they know nothing, that if he ends up here, great, cool, he will be welcomed with open arms, I believe was the quote. And otherwise, they don't know anything. And it's Russia. That's how it goes.
Sure.
Until he shows up, you don't know nothing.
The bigger part of the quote is actually the first part that I put in the article I did.
Okay.
Which is, it really doesn't affect anything, basically anything. So in terms of if something were to happen, yes, you're right. That's great. They're welcoming with open arms, all that type of stuff. And the fans should be excited if that happens. But they're under the impression it's still 3 years. This will be year 2 of 3. He's got 2 years left on that contract. And that's the expectation still. And
He's
it's not going to
necessarily expected to be here.
And regardless of whether this happens or doesn't, it doesn't really affect the offseason, was the point. So I don't think there's any reason not to take their word for things like that. So if he's telling you Whether he plays or doesn't play for the Flyers, it doesn't matter. We're approaching this the same way because, and I'm going to get into that in a second, because he did give before all this ever came up, he gave a detailed answer on kind of what dictates their timeline for now. And it's not an exact science, obviously. But that really kind of put an end to the Mishkov talk. Hilferty kind of addressed it too. And like even said, from a fan perspective, sure, you want it now and you hope it happens and all stuff like that. But he pulls back and goes, but playing the business card, I can't just be a fan about it. I've got to understand that he's under contract. We have no control. So we just watch him and wait until it happens. At some point, it's going to be great.
We just keep getting more excited.
Right. And at some point, this is going to be great for the Flyers, but that might not be tomorrow. It might be 2 years from now. Yep. That's all there is to it. So the real meat of, like, I think what was really brought up was kind of the idea of how some of this offseason is going to be shaped, and then kind of looking to next season, what defines success. Again, we kind of already talked about that with the first year, where it was like, well, success is going to be doing more than you thought you were going to do, or players taking steps that you didn't expect, things like that. Like, you weren't going to try to measure at the beginning of the year. We even said we expect the wins and losses to not look so great. So a winning season, a successful season, is going to be, this guy looked really good, looks like a piece for the future, and so did that guy, and so did that guy. And you got some of those answers, I think. Like, the player everybody turns back to easily is Tyson Forster. It's, hey, look what he did. That looks like a player. That we have every reason to be excited, and the goal is take the next step. What's the next step further than that? That's success next season. And you can do that, and you can do that with probably 8, 9, 10 other guys that are currently on the roster, in terms of whether it's the younger guys like Bobby Brink or, somebody of that nature, whether it's somebody that somebody like Jamie Drysdale that you just got, that you're sitting here going, well, we're only scratching the surface with them. We don't really know much about him yet still. What does he turn into? It could be about a guy like Cam York, who took a big step, and you're saying, what's the next step? And it could even be about, it can even be about your goalie. It can be about Sam Harrison, who you know can start games and can start down the stretch, but is there another level?
Sure,
that's
maybe
success.
Travis Sanheim kind of showed a bit of another level to start the season, had overall
and he's
a pretty
not out of the
solid
equation.
Season. That's what I'm saying. Exactly. What does this mean for him?
Sure.
Does he take another step? Does he extend his play from the first 20 games of the season? Can he push that to 40, 50, 60 games? Can he put a whole season of that together? Because quite frankly, he looks like a Norris candidate the first 3 weeks of the year last year.
Sure. And so that's what success kind of looks like. And they kind of talked about, and this kind of lumps into the answer Danny Briere gave about how he doesn't feel like they're consistent playoff contenders yet, that it doesn't mean next year they'll be in contention for the playoffs. And that's kind of what they were echoing. Like, sure, you want to win games, you want to be in the playoff push, you want to try to get there, but we have to recognize patience here as the big factor. I thought it was really interesting that Hilferty brought up, he studied, like, they're studying other franchises. They're looking at Florida and going, because we're going to get to the Stanley Cup Final, obviously.
Yeah, we are.
And they're looking at a team like Florida and going, well, how did they do it? What can we take from their way of doing things that could work for us?
Fleece Calgary.
Well, sure. There's certain, trade, won't trade for a franchise player. Yeah,
right. Get a top 10 player in the NHL for
trade a guy who had 110 points for a guy who pretty much can equal that any given year. Exactly.
Right. Crazy.
Without thinking twice about it. I know, but it's about making a thing. And then Jonesy, like, kind of also not countered the point, because that's not really the right word here, but like was adding in that you don't want to take a step back, but he kind of mentioned, like, take a step back in terms of, even if you take a step back in the number of games you won or the points total or where you finished in the standings, you don't want to take a step back in what the culture's become. That was the primary goal of this season, was building some of that culture, and you want to keep that continued. Again, another line that I thought was really interesting was talking about how, from the hockey side to the business side, that maybe even if there was no animosity behind it or anything like that, putting up these walls that were like, hey, you're not welcome on this side. This is the business side, and you stick to the hockey side, and vice versa. And that they've kind of taken that down, and it's like, okay, everybody's part of this equation. Everything's got to work in one way, shape, or form. to make the whole thing go. And I thought that was an interesting, again, kind of, I'm going to get to the next part of this, which is more the actual, what goes into the roster construction of it, that is about the patching things up. But that's the other aspect of patching certain things up, is if you built up walls between certain departments and nobody can talk to each other, and there's a lack of communication, and probably because of it, a lack of transparency and accountability as a result, then what does that say about, certainly what does it say about the rest of your franchise? We're sitting here looking at stuff on the surface and going, oh, this contract may be a problem, and this and that. And it's no, inside of your own building, you've got, basically what you're saying is you got people who aren't talking to each other. And that's what you had to fix. So if that part is fixed in year one, that can only make things better as you go forward. So I was encouraged to hear something like that, where it's like, okay, and that's really pulling the curtain back on how bad it was.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like to sit there and say,
we
had
kind of knew how bad.
talk.
Yeah. Well, and even just like in the locker room, for instance, like we knew there were some issues. I don't think we knew, quite to that extent, quite getting that curtain pulled back like that, but it's nice to see the transparency. It's nice to see, hey, we're going to be communicative about what our issues are and how we're going to fix them.
Right. Exactly. And so, which kind of segues into the other part of the mess. Like if your job in year one, if you're Keith Jones and Danny Briere and Dan Hilferty stepping in for that matter, and one part of your job is, we got to clean up the mess that's internally within this organization. We've got to clean up the part that is what's going on behind the scenes that people may not know about, that we can still fix without it being such a public problem. That's number one. Number two being, what happened to parts of the fan base? Like, what did we do exactly to screw this thing up? Let's talk to people. Let's actually get some direct feedback to find out, where did we go wrong with this thing? Where did this go wrong? And how can we try to fix that? And Hilferty immediately pointed out, in a few weeks, about a month, I think is what it really is, they're going to have development camp right after the draft. And he mentioned, the stands here will be full, and we're going to do what we always do, which is go around and talk to people and just, tell them to stick with us and find out what's working for them too. And you can't go wrong. You can't go wrong with getting direct feedback, which then takes you to the other part of the mess, which is the cap space and everything that kind of goes into actually putting a roster together. And they don't have a lot of space. Let's just be blunt about that. They don't have a lot of space. And a lot of it has to do, not yet. And a lot of it has to do with two things. One is that you have to factor in any long-term IR eligible players at the beginning of the season even for just a day.
Sure.
So right away, that throws Ryan Ellis and Ryan Johansson into the mix, as that's a lot of money. That's $10.25 million that you have to account for even for just one day. Now, you do have workarounds, because you're going to probably run a bunch of players that are of the in-between rankings right now, the minor league NHL players, so to speak.
Right.
And on one, like in one case, you're going to do it with Tyson Forster, because Tyson Forster's waiver exempt. So you're going to bump him just to clear the cap for a second and then say, come on back. You're going to probably do it. You would probably do it with the likes of along the lines of Brink, Addard, Jennings probably falls into that category when the time comes. You're going to put Cal Peterson through waivers. And just have that slip to the minors and just be buried in the minors.
Bury the 1.35 or whatever it is.
Right. So you're still going to be on the books for 385 is what it is. You're still paying, going from one year to the next, you're still paying retention on Kevin Hayes, which is in the $3 million range.
Yeah, it's like 3.5, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty close. Yes.
And then I have it up here. It is,
the contract was 7.14, so it should be like 3.62.
357.
Okay, something like that. Yeah. And Tony D'Angelo's buyout money, which has one more year, is 1.67 mil, I believe.
1 2/3. Yeah.
Yep. So that's a lot. And the good news is D'Angelo is one more year of the buyout, and then it's over.
And Hayes is 2.
Peterson is 1 year. Johansson is 1 year.
Yep.
As much as you're going to have to deal with Ryan Ellis for 3 more seasons, and you're going to have to deal with Kevin Hayes for 2, and you're going to have to deal with a couple of other things that go on for a little while, like
Chuck Fletcher wasn't very good at his job.
No kidding. And for what it's worth, I think you're going to be dealing with, just to give yourself any space. You have no space to sign anybody. Remember this.
Nope.
Like right now, if we just went through some of the very basics, Bobby Brink does not have a contract, whether you can bury it in the minors or not. You know what I mean? Like for the day, I mean.
Well, and that also means if you're making a trade, it's pretty money in, money out.
Well, it would have to be number one, and then, but you also need contracts for Igor Zamula is going to probably get a new contract. He's an RFA, and then there's not really a UFA that you're going to look to probably keep. You know, your only UFAs that you would have to spend on are Gurianov, who they said is not coming back, Mark Stahl, who they said is probably not coming back, and then Eric Johnson's kind of lingered as an option. But again, if you don't really have space, you're going to probably just go with the cheaper route. I mean, I think Jennings due for a contract too as an RFA, so that comes into play too.
By the way, we didn't mention him when we were talking about LTIR guys and dead money, but Cam Atkinson also only has 1 more year left. I'm just saying.
Well, that's where I was going with this, because I think to give yourself some flexibility immediately, I think that's where the buyout option comes in. And then, yes, he's on your books for technically 2 more years, but it's still going to give you some form of savings. And then at that point, you go into next year with 1 more year of Hayes retention, Atkinson buyout, which would be 1 more year at that point, and Ellis's LTIR money.
So here's my thing: if you're going to discuss buying out Cam Atkinson, I think it's a reason. I think it's a reasonable discussion. I think it's a discussion that can be had, but I would really like to know if you're going to have Matvei Michkov on your team next year, because the truth of it is if he's not going to be here this year, but you get a pretty good chance that he's going to be here next year, I kind of think you just take your medicine, you eat the 1 bad year of his contract rather than spread it over 2, and you try to maximize for next year and for the, start moving forward. Maybe you make a big free agent next year.
The only reason that you can't potentially is that then you're completely reliant on moving a contract in some way, because that's the only way you can sign everybody else. The RFAs I'm talking about.
But I think that's more doable than,
I mean, short of actually legitimately sending through a roster of 20 people then on the first night of the season or day 1 of the season, and sending everybody else to the minors to try. And even then I don't know if it's enough, because it's
okay. That's fair.
That's the hard part. I'm with you. If there's a way to not put the extra year onto that, I would do it. I just don't know if I see a way to do it. I was playing around with cap friendly when this was kind of like a thing or whatever, or just even without Michkov. And
how many retention spots do they have used for this upcoming year?
Well, trade retention's different.
Okay. Like salary retention?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
no, I know. Do you know how many they have this year? I think
one.
They have 1 available, or they
have 2 available. They have 1 used.
Okay. Can you send half of Cam Atkinson's contract somewhere?
I mean, you could try. The problem is I don't know what team's taking him based on what you saw last year. Even at half of that cap hit, like
a Utah wouldn't be willing to take a risk if
you
give them a give them a 3rd round pick. I don't think it's something you want to do, but
I think
at that point, give them the whole contract. But you know what I mean.
But exactly, it's you're creeping into territories that I don't think you want to go down, because the whole point of this whole thing was about how Jonesy basically said, listen, whenever the time comes, the indicator for the timeline is when you have the money, when some of the cap space opens up, there's stuff that's going to come off the cap. And if you're looking further down the line, we're going to have, he's saying, we're going to have real key decisions to make, and we have to get them right. There's no room for error when it comes to adding players to the mix and using up that money again. If you're going to back yourself into the cap corner, you better do it with guys that you actually realize you want to have. And that's why, again, it goes back to the mess created by previous regimes when you sit there and you go, did you need to keep Ristolainen for however many extra years? I think it was 5 technically, so it's 3 more. Did you need to do that then? Did you need to, before the last year of Chuck Fletcher, did you need to sign Travis Sanheim to that extension right then and there, or could you have waited that out? That was up for discussion. You had options where you didn't get buried by certain contracts right away. And I'm not saying like Sanheim's kind of the hard one, because Sanheim now I think you look and move forward and you go, well, there is a place for him. You were going to have to sign that contract in some way, shape, or form.
He has recovered that.
The difference is, and listen, maybe you can find somebody for Ristolainen because people just want to go off of the aura that is, instead of worrying about whether or not, not track record, but
he was solid this year.
When he played,
when he played, he was solid.
Like, believe it or not, that's the hard part for me to come back around from, is that he didn't play for most of the second half of the season. So, not even say what are you going off of, because it doesn't even have anything about it's not even about going off of what he is or what he was during the season or whatever. It's just he didn't even come back to give you a chance to prove, like, I am healthy, I can play at that level still. Right. Like that the injury is not going to be the end of this thing or whatever. Right. So that's where they're coming from. And in the immediate, and that doesn't even include other expiring contracts, by the way. Like you have one more year on, because you're going to get to the end of the season next year and be looking at, I believe, let's see, who's up. Hathaway's up. Delorier will have 1 year left.
Yep.
Like, and Delorier, you would probably still see your way through that at 1.75 million. Why?
I agree.
But you know what I'm saying? Or you try to move it because maybe somebody's crazy enough to take 1.75 mil at that point. Sure.
Honestly, Nick Delorier is a great, and he's a really, really solid fourth liner in today's NHL. And one of these years, when they're willing to move him, somebody will scoop him up at the trade deadline that's going for a run.
Maybe.
He's a great depth piece. He's a good locker room guy. He's a big vibes guy. I think Nick Delorier would be a great trade deadline pickup for a team that's trying to fill out a roster.
It's possible. There's too much to get it, and that's the point, though, is that, again, it's a word people don't have time for, which is patience.
Right.
It's,
well, when you're waiting on a guy who is in Russia and may not come over for a couple of years, we can afford to be patient. Like, I think, and we've talked about this on the show a lot, but like, I think the hammer comes down and you hit the gas pedal once Michkov steps foot in North America.
Well, and
until then,
well, sure, and therein lies the problem.
Yep.
The temptation of it being possible now,
I agree,
changes the way people think. Because now all of a sudden, like, I get this, I can get the sense, and I haven't seen.
Oh, I'm bloodthirsty too. I don't actually want them to, but I want to hear Mitch Marner proposals.
Well, and in fairness, I didn't really see negative feedback to what was being said about the possibility that this is not, that this is still a work in progress, and they got to wait to clean up the mess kind of before they can move forward. I think people appreciated that it was called as it, like, calling it as you see it. It's still a mess, because that's something that you didn't get with the previous people or whatever. So you can go back to hating the previous moves all you want to.
Oh, and we do.
But you know what? Like, and this is actually a good segue into where we're going to go with the other stuff around the league, because one of the things I've seen a lot of is about, because there's a player on one of these two teams that is now in the Stanley Cup Final. You can figure it out quickly, and I'm sure the listeners may be able to figure it out quickly too.
Okay.
Because I'm watching a lot of examples on social media of people crying over spilt milk that has been known for long enough. Like, in terms of, you can't go back and change what's happened from somebody else's decision, no matter whose it was.
Right.
That's what Keith Jones and Dan Hilferty were feeding you today with this, was,
sure,
we can't change the past and the mess that we're in. All we can do is make the right decisions to get out of it.
Absolutely.
So bear with us while we make the right decisions to get out of it. We know it's important. We know we've got to get it right. And again, not something I included in the article per se, because it was a lot of businessy speak, if you will. But they did say that like 92 to 95% of the people who had season tickets last year renewed, or something like that. And but why? Why did that happen? Because they've been
saying this for a year, right? Because they've been saying basically the same thing since they came in, and fans have been begging for since essentially the last days of Ron Hextall. Like,
honesty is refreshing, yeah,
right. And I honestly think this is kind of what Hextall was doing. But the difference is Briere and Jones will talk to you about it. And we all know that Ron Hextall wanted his own little private club, and he's the only one who has the manifesto and knows what's going on. And in this case, we see a little bit of a different managerial style, and we see several collaborators. And like you mentioned, Keith Jones talking about how the fact that him and Danny Briere are partners, right? He's not his boss, and that sort of thing is nice to see. But also, it's nice to see a commitment to winning, even if that means losing.
Okay, but there's also a difference between, like, again, this doesn't go against the counter argument of you don't tank, because people immediately associate it with like, oh, well, then just tank then. No. If you just don't have as good a team and you naturally lose, there's nothing you can do about that. You know what I mean? You're going through it. Like there's a legitimate chance that for the upcoming season that they bring back pretty much everybody exactly the same as it was.
Pretty close to the same roster.
Unless they make a trade. And even then, how many hockey trades are you making in one off season that don't include the things you don't want to move? Like, you might be stuck. And if that's the case, then you're getting another year of, Morgan Frost is kind of up and down the lineup, or you're getting another year of Ryan Poehling might be playing like a second line center, even though he's not really a second line center. Or let's try to do some of the other ones I'm thinking of, because like it was bumping guys up into places you don't expect.
Can I ask you a bit of a tough question here?
Yeah.
Well, first one's not tough. We're going to get to some tough questions. I'll lead you in with some easy ones here.
Okay.
What side does Travis Konechny primarily play on?
Right.
What side does Matvei Michkov primarily play on?
Left.
Okay. Who's their center long term?
I don't know.
Okay. Is it Morgan Frost?
No, it's somebody that they don't have yet.
I was going to say, is it Sean Couturier? Because if the answer to those two questions is no, then you have a problem.
Well, we've talked about that. We already know that. Like, they don't have a number one center. Like, and that's the thing, right? Like, I think what people are losing a little bit out of this is that you would be setting yourself up for, like, with the Konechny conversation, is you're trying to potentially set yourself up with maybe, and here's the thing, maybe tomorrow and this upcoming season, for example, and let's just for hypothetical sake say Michkov plays this year. Let's just for hypothetical sake say he's here. So Michkov gets a chance pretty much almost right at the top right away, because he's in the top six day one. Well, top six for sure. I'm teetering towards, like, let's put it this way: who would be your top line?
Probably him.
Probably, if not in the beginning, then like at some point, probably, right?
Pretty quickly, yeah.
So he's one of them. I would feel safe saying that at least in the immediate, Travis Konechny would be your one on the other side.
You're probably right.
Look, long term, maybe you're two, but I
think ideally Travis Konechny is probably your two.
Well, ideally, but right now on the team that is currently constructed, he's going to be your one.
Yeah,
there's no way around that.
And for the record, if he were to ever slide to two, he's a really good two.
Right now, and in fairness, by the way, so I remember I had this conversation fairly recently.
Yeah.
If Mishkov's included, you also have on, and this is just generalizing the winger, not going left and right specific here, because we know they bounce around like crazy sometimes. But your wingers that include Michkov obviously would be one of them, and then you go Konechny, assuming you do the extension, so Konechny, Tippett, Farabee, Forrester. You all of a sudden have like here's the logjam, right? Like, look at all these wingers.
Here's the core.
I didn't even bring up Bobby Brink as one of them. Also, he probably slots in as a 3 as well, right?
Probably.
And then, like, my point in saying that is that makes it feel like something's got to give. Oh, if Mishkov's here and I've got 4 other guys that are all, or not all, but almost all. I think Konechny's the one exception at this point. The rest are all in that 25-ish and under category.
Travis Konechny is the old man.
Well, he is, but my point is that if everybody else falls into a similar category, something's got to give, right?
Yep.
I got 6 guys who fall into this, or 5 guys technically who fall into the same category, and I don't have centerman. What am I going to do?
And you would assume at some point that I mean, they're probably not going to spend too many draft picks on wings for the next couple of years, but you'll pick up a couple, and somebody's going to try to crack the lineup somewhere along the way.
Well,
So
sure.
theoretically, you got too many wingers, man. Yeah, and
but that leads,
and that's where the hockey trades start to come into play.
That's what leads to. Oh well, so maybe we have a conversation about Joel Farabee. Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm saying, like, let's just wait until there's I know
if you're Danny Briere right now and you have to trade one of Travis Konechny or Joel Farabee, who's gone?
Probably Farabee, because Konechny,
Okay.
I know what I feel like more than I know with Farabee. I know what I'm getting with Konechny every time. I know every game I'm getting somebody who's engaged and trying to make a difference, and I know that for a season I'm getting roughly a 30-goal scorer.
I think Farabee's getting there, and I think it took Travis Konechny a while to get there too.
Look, I wouldn't try to do it this year if you can find a way to make all this work. That's what I'm saying.
I know.
Like,
I was just curious because
don't force the hockey trade.
Right, because I do think.
And don't force it with a guy who's under 25.
Right. Well, I was going to say, I do think there is definitely still some untapped potential with Farabee. I don't think we've seen his ceiling. We've seen some flashes of it, but I honestly, if you've been listening to the show for a while, you know I've been high on Joel Farabee for a very long time.
Real talk for a minute here.
Yeah.
You really want to get cap space immediately if this is the way that it's going, and you want to do it in a way that you know the contract is gone kind of material, then you trade Scott Lawton. If that's what you really want, if you want to find the easiest way to get cap space, knowing that the contract could go in full, like, I don't feel like you know for certain. Like, I don't want to say you don't feel like you know for certain, but if you're hesitant about Joel Farabee because he's in an age bracket that you don't want to move from, I still don't think anybody would have a problem trading for him in full. The contract seems relatively affordable. He's at the age that he is. You go to the right team, I think somebody wants to try that. The problem is, what are you getting back, and is it worth it to trade a guy who's that young?
God, you know what sucks?
What?
Joel Farabee's going to make a great Boston Bruin.
Ugh.
Holy! Oh my God, he's going to murder people. Oh, it's going to be crazy. Okay,
but that's my point. That's why I go back to the Lawton thing. Yeah. It's like, if all this is about is how do I get some money, then there's a guy who you trade because he's 30, right? Or he's getting close to 30. How much longer can you factor that into your future, even if you want good leaders in the room? You sometimes have to make the tough decision if it's only about the money. If it's not only about the money and it's about the culture and everything else,
then you don't move Scott Lawton, at least not right now.
No, then you know what, you don't. Then you don't move anybody. Is my point.
Wow.
Then you relatively punt the offseason and be like, listen, there's nothing we can do with the money. We've got to let the D'Angelo buyout get off the books. We got to get towards a point where the Hayes money is almost off the books. We got to get this Peterson contract out of here, Johansson out of here, and then maybe we can start to talk about who we can bring in after the fact.
Well, and for what it's worth, that's essentially what Keith Jones and Dan Hilferty said they're going to do.
Right, but that's my point. So you either trade somebody you probably don't want to trade, or you have to punt the offseason for the most part.
I agree. And like, if I'm playing NHL 24 on the PlayStation 5, I'm absolutely fine in a trade because it's way more fun that way because we're playing video games. But
it's not a video game.
Right. In the real world, in real life, with cap consequences and long-term futures to think about.
Exactly.
Let's pump the brakes a little bit here. We don't need to trade Travis Konechny.
Beside the point anyway, because of the fact that, like, that's why I go back to the Atkinson thing, because the Atkinson decision is the easiest way to get money without touching a player that you feel like you want to keep.
But I think you do whatever you can to not buy out Atkinson just to get it over and done with.
And again, the only reason I keep coming back to that is because they're going to need money from somewhere. And if you don't want to move Farabee per se, and you don't want to move Lawton, who I think outside of Konechny, who they've already indicated is a priority, so I doubt it's going to be him. And if I have that kind of doubt right now that their priority is to keep him, for beyond next year, that it's looking like a long-term deal, right? Like, that's the goal,
right?
Then it's not going to be him. And I can't sit there and go, well, for 1 year he's making $5.5 million. That's very tradable for what he's given, if somebody really wants to make an upgrade. But they're clearly not going to go that way. So I can't find many other options that I sit there and I go, well, I'm not intrigued by that player, or they aren't, for that matter. you know?
Well, right. Well, I'm just sitting here and I'm trying to think if maybe you can get cheeky and sneak somebody through waivers on that day to be cap compliant. Like, for
Might have
example,
to.
well, I'm saying somebody you don't necessarily want to throw on there. Like, I mean,
Like
you throw
Risto.
Cam Atkinson. We throw Cam Atkinson on waivers.
You
You
could. I mean,
throw,
yeah, sure.
and maybe even Aristo, sure. And like, it. See, I think Risto's a little more. You're a little more likely to lose Risto because he's still a functional NHL player.
The only reason I disagree with that is because one way or the other, whether you did it with Atkinson or you did it with Risto, it's north of $5 million a year, and I want you to find me the team that's got that on the day the season starts.
Well, I think
because if you do it, you're not claiming him and then saying, "Oh, by the way, he can go to the minors now." No, you're claiming him for
I
you.
know, right?
And that's why it works. So
I wonder if that's how you get your money through, and I wonder if they're planning on doing something like that.
By the way, the only reason I'm not sure about that also is because, like the Peterson contract, I don't think it just wipes it all away. It's percentage.
It just chunks out the money or the
NHL
money.
Right. And my point is that, like, that's why my point with Atkinson is that you can literally take that contract and cut it almost more. I think it's more than in half. You'd be paying like 2 point something million. You'd save $3 million. And that might be enough money to start with to say, if I sent down every player that I've got who I can think of who would go to the minors and probably pass through because they may not be great NHLers yet, I send all of them down and I include Forrester, who's waiver exempt.
Right.
And by the time
that one's safe.
Right. And by the time I do all of that, I have just enough money to be cap compliant and move those other 2 contracts to LTIR to bring up everybody else effective immediately. And then you're ready to go.
Right.
Like, but that's it. So it's interesting though, because it almost comes across like think about it from an offseason planning standpoint. You're going, I can imagine people so that's really the only move is buying out Cam Atkinson, and the rest of the and then the rest of the offseason looks like this. You know, we just sit there and kind of like, what do we do? And the draft. Man. The draft is important. And listen, maybe there is something crazy. Like we talked about the possibility of, you know, what's going on with Martin Nakash and, you know, like being players like that being available and what could you put together to make it happen or something like that. You know what I mean? Like if those things were possible, yeah, maybe. I don't know. But like,
right.
At some point, that might be a pipe dream this offseason because you just don't have stuff you're going to move a ton of.
Right. And here's the thing. It's better to make no moves than bad moves.
I think it's
I would rather you do nothing.
I would rather focus on the long term than do something super short term.
Say, for example, trade a good young defenseman and multiple draft picks so that you can trade for another draft defenseman the following day. Like, you wouldn't want to do any crazy stuff like that. That would be wild.
And like Farabee's a perfect example in this because Farabee comes like at his age, you're sitting there going, listen, if your response is we have no room for error, we've got to get this right. That includes that move. It includes how do we get some cap? Like, yeah, when we get cap space, we need to use it wisely and use it right and do all the right things. But if you're going to do something to create some more also, you better get that move right too. And
I agree.
Like we better not be sitting there 5 years from now going when his contract is over and he's turning roughly 30, 29, 30 in that range. We better not be sitting there at that point going, look at what an all-star career he's had while whomever you get in return or whatever you signed is on the verge of another buyout or something. You can't.
Well, and especially when the team isn't particularly close, right? Like, if you're a perennial playoff team and you're going to be good anyway, but this is the move, you know, you're taking a bit of a shot to try to put you over the top. That's one thing. We are on foundational building block type stuff with this team still. They still need a first line center. They still need a top defenseman. Really, they might have solved their goaltending issues, ? We'll see, I guess. But like, that's what I'm saying is like, there's still a lot of work for this team to do. This is not the time for you to be trying to squeak out little edge. Wait out the year. It's, I believe you said something like $9 million off the books for next year. The cap's going to go up a little bit anyway.
Well, right. So it's what I added up was
that's plenty of money for Leon Draisaitl.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but they do. Like you're right though. $4 million for Johansson, 3 point. Assuming he's in minors all year, it'd be 3.85 for Peterson. I know it's 5 typically, but we know where that contract's going. It's going to be 3.85 toward the cap. Yeah. And then it's what we say another 1.67 million for D'Angelo, and that's all gone.
But then the 1.35 that gets held at the NHL that gets held at the NHL level, that just gets wiped out anyway, right? So Peterson's whole 5 will come off.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that when you look at the picture at the end of the night, like at the end of the day, when you're getting to the opening night roster and trying to figure out how they get cap compliant this year, you're factoring in 3.85 towards
that's fair. You're right.
Because of the fact that you're going to bury the contract. So your relief is not $5 million. You're already relieving yourself of part of that. It's the 3.85 that you get back at the end ultimately. Right. But that's why I'm saying those two alone are nearly $8 million. And then I got another 1.67, for when D'Angelo's off the books. And then another year after that, you're looking at the other ones, right? The near 3.6 that is Kevin Hayes. And to be honest, screw it. Who cares if you need to spend $2 million this year and $1 million next year or whatever it's going to be on Cam Atkinson? Just do it. Like, get it over with. Take that, kind of eat it like you have to. It's part of the process.
Right.
And when he's off the books too, he's off the books. You wouldn't be asking that question if you didn't sit him for as long as you did at the end of the year. Like, that's the way it is. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it just is what it is. So,
all right. I think that is a good place to kind of put a pin in the end of the press conference-y stuff. There wasn't a whole lot there, and we still managed to talk about it for 40 minutes. So,
well, it was a little less than that.
No, I know, but still, we got time out of it. So, all
right. So, where do we want to start? We want to start in the East or the West?
I think we should start in the East. I think that's a little closer to home for us.
I am in agreement.
Yeah. So, for the second year in a row, the Florida Panthers win the East. They come out, they defeat the New York Rangers in 6 games. I will be honest, I underestimated. I will continue to root against the Panthers or bet against the Panthers, and they will continue to prove me wrong.
Yeah, you picked the Rangers.
Holy, I sure did. Because here's the thing. Sergei Bobrovsky, man.
Yeah.
Holy, they have him.
There's that
dialed.
By the way, so thanks for taking like 5 seconds to complete the segue from the last part of this, where there's the guy I was talking about.
Yep.
Like, I really can't. Like, I'm not sitting here saying that that's not a decision that haunts. Don't get me wrong.
Of course,
but it's a decision that was also made 11 years ago.
Right.
Exactly. I'm not sitting here like looking at that going, well, because what was the knock after? Like, right away when he went to Columbus, right away he's a Vezina winning goalie, but the knock was always, well, then the playoffs come and
he disappears.
And then the clock strikes midnight, he turns back into a pumpkin, and he can't stop a beach ball.
It turns out that they finally convinced him, hey, Bob, you don't have to play 68 games a year.
Well, that does help.
We can give the other guys a shot, keep you a little more well rested, and you can look like a Vezina winning goalie in the playoffs. Crazy how that works.
It is. Look, the one thing about him that I still can't believe is he's 35. He's going to turn 36 in September. And I thought
he looks like he's in the best shape of his life.
But that's the thing. He was so overly athletic that I remember even saying on this show, no less, that eventually, like, he's going to hit that age and not be able to play because he's thrown his body around. Like, the style he plays just isn't going to be equipped for a 35-year-old when it comes down to it. And to be honest, I think he's changed his style a little bit. Like, he's still flexible to make some of those big saves, but I don't think he's throwing himself around like he used to. I think he's not wasting movement.
I absolutely agree. And I know that he's one of those guys that, because he is so athletic, I know because for a long time he was so reckless with his body almost, that he sweat out so much. I think he was one of those guys who loses 10 to 15 pounds a game. And I think a major factor for this series is that extra rehydration day for Sergei Bobrovsky.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm going to save my
I think it's a huge deal.
I'm going to save my thoughts on the schedule for when we get to the
All right.
final itself, because I do have thoughts, but right now we're talking about the Florida Panthers and winning the Eastern Conference
Yep.
Final. So I want to stick to that.
Absolutely.
So this was the interesting part. So for me, because I picked Florida in 7, technically, which according to you was never going to be the way that it went, because we will never know. We will never know if that goes 7, if going back to the Garden for Game 7 changes the narrative any. It could have. Honestly, that's where you give the Panthers credit for finishing it on home ice, where hey, you
they've
got a
been
more
really
favorable
good.
game. They have been good. So everything about Game 1 was what I expected. And then the Rangers win games 2 and 3,
but don't really look like the better team in either
even
game.
if the Panthers had been the better team and the better team in performance, the better team on
Igor
paper.
Shesterkin, the story coming out of Game 3 was Igor Shesterkin has stolen the Rangers the lead in this series.
Well, so, and as much as that's true, so after the Rangers won Game 3, they scored 5 goals in the final 3 games of the series. That was it. And listen, there's 2 things about this. As much as the goaltending has been great, as much as we can sit here and praise Bobrovsky to no end, it's twofold. The Rangers offense completely disappeared. Everybody who you think would jump in and score, where did Chris Kreider go? Where did Mika Zibanejad go? Kind of where did Artemi Panarin go? But it goes hand in hand, because defensively that team was so on point. And the biggest stat of the entire postseason to this point is that Alexander Barkov, when he's been on the ice, has allowed no goals to Nikita Kucherov, 1 to David Pastrnak, and none to Artemi Panarin.
In a combined like hour and a half of ice time. Like, it's insane.
Something stupid. Yep.
It's like an hour and 24 minutes or some ridiculous nonsense.
Like, I know, and maybe we'll just do this part now, because this doesn't really reflect on the whole series or whatever.
Sure.
Because whenever somebody makes it, we jump in immediately with, well, who are the Conn Smythe candidates?
Alexander Barkov.
I think Barkov's leading. I think Barkov's the leader right now.
If it's not Sergei Bobrovsky, man.
Oh, I know, but that's why I'm saying I think that Barkov may have a slight edge. Well, and I'll tell you what. I'll give you another reason why.
Does he have any big goals in this run?
I don't know about defining big. Well, hold on. I got
all it takes is one, and I give it to him. But man, Bob has been so incredibly stupid good.
Okay, so I know what I'm thinking. I know one of the things I'm thinking of already, which is Barkov helped set up the game winner in overtime for the Panthers in Game 4.
And that's pretty close.
I'm checking. So I know he didn't score in the last 2 games.
Okay. Yeah, but almost nobody did. So
no, I know what I'm saying. It wasn't the obvious,
right?
It wasn't the obvious guys. I'm not really seeing anything with the Boston series. I'm also trying to go by defining moments in terms of you're going to remember the guy who won Game 6 more than you are Game 3.
But regardless, you get what I'm saying. Is if there's a moment or two for Barkov, I think there's definitely a world where he gets there. But I think Bobrovsky's got a really strong team.
So this is the reason why. Another reason why I wanted to give Barkov a nod here, kind of, because the defensive stat may definitely get some leverage here. When I hit total points for the postseason, once I get past the other team we're going to talk to, because I have to go through a few names before I can get down the list to other players playing in the series. Barkov has 17 points in the playoffs, and that's tied with Carter Verhaeghe for second on the team, 2 behind Matthew Tkachuk. And Matthew Tkachuk's been great.
Matthew Tkachuk also has some Conn Smythe value too here.
He does, but here's the thing. I don't feel like Matthew Tkachuk, and I don't know if it's because, the number is 5 goals, so he's putting up a lot of points without scoring goals. Like last season, Bobrovsky's probably it if they win the cup over Vegas, because he was that good, and I'm not taking anything away from that. But Tkachuk had something like, beyond just scoring goals, he had something like 5 game winners.
Yeah, I think some
like
of that,
those clutch moments may have helped him get a nod for it, because it's like every time you needed a goal, it was like he was the guy who was scoring every time.
Matthew Tkachuk, in my opinion, should have received serious conversation for the Conn Smythe last year, even though they lost. He was that stupid good.
The problem was how dominant Vegas
know.
was in the final, and then they could
totally
just lump it in there.
Right.
But
I think
on top of the point total, though, Barkov has 6 goals in the playoffs. It doesn't feel like it, but he does. And I think when you combine that with the defensive number and particularly the stat of taking away a bunch of guys who had so many points in the regular season.
And now he gets the final boss, right? Like now he gets
bingo. If he does anything to tame the two it's beyond 2. It's 3 or 4 guys, really. I mean,
it's 2.
It's
there
the main 2 guys, and then the 2 supporting.
There are talented guys on the Edmonton Oilers, but when you're talking about Nikita Kucherov and when you're talking about like the other elite players that he has shut down through this run, Artemi Panarin that he has shut down through this run so far, there's 2.
Fair enough.
It's Connor, it's Leon, and then there are a lot of very good players. That'll be for the rest of the team.
Sure.
Because Alexander Markov will be glued to 97. And if he's not glued to 97, he's glued to 29.
Yep.
Okay. I'm pretty sure. And that is what he is doing with his 4 to 7 games.
You would think you would know that number for how many times you've brought up wanting him to sign.
Listen, I'm just saying it's going to be great.
I mean, just like you can't wait to get your 39 jerseys, whenever the kid comes over.
29, 39, come on.
Well, but anyway.
Come on.
But anyway, so like I do want to go back to your point about Shesterkin really quick because like the series nearly went 7 because of him.
He was silly.
He was outstanding.
Silly.
Yeah. I mean, full marks to what they were able to it was a good competitive series. You can't take that away from it. It was just one of these, we're going to get into the other, we'll obviously get into the West's side of this too. Very similar series.
Yes.
Like just the trajectory of the way things went, you look at this one, what we have besides the outside of game 1, you had 5 straight 1-goal games, 3 in overtime.
Right. Crazy.
At least this time, the Rangers at least won 2 games, so that this way, if Peter Laviolette says it didn't really feel like a sweep or whatever, you can't sit there and kind of go like, oh, it was close, like it was a close series. No,
it was a very close.
This was legit very close.
It was very close, but at the same time,
the Florida I told you that's a team on a mission.
Game 4, Game 5, Game 6, all felt the vice tightening progressively from game to game. Like the first couple games,
especially.
That's what I'm saying. Like 4, you started to see the tide turn. 5 is when they really locked it in, and then 6, the Rangers couldn't do anything. The Rangers couldn't do anything. And at that point, like I mean, you're just gonna pummel Igor Shesterkin until something goes in. Like it's that simple.
Well, it also comes down to, especially when you're playing out the first period and throughout the course of that was a relatively close shot total in the first period, 13-9, all things considered. But because it was scoreless, like Florida got that first one and it was like at that given point in time, it was, that's it. We're making sure that this is going to hold up. And once they got the second one in the third period, I mean, seriously, the second one in third period, it was game over.
Oh, absolutely.
It really felt like it. I mean, I know there's 10 minutes
when
left
the
in that
Rangers
game.
Score, right? Even when the Rangers score,
I know there's 10 minutes
left to go. Yeah, there's no shot they're getting more good chances on that. Like we're done here.
I mean, the Rangers had 6 shots on goal in the third period of a game of an elimination game that they're trailing in, and it has nothing to do with want to. It's literally, where are you supposed to go when there's no ice?
Speaking of not shooting the puck, let's transition over to our other series, because oh boy, the Edmonton Oilers made a habit out of that one in this series. Okay. So like you said, these do feel like pretty similar series. We come out of game 3 with, in this case, Dallas up 2-1. Things have been, I'm not going to say wide open, right? We're playing tight playoff hockey for sure, but things are still a little more free flowing, a little more, we're still getting a little more creative and taking some risks on offense.
Yeah.
And we end up with 8 goals in game 3. Dallas wins a wild one, and then from then on, the Edmonton defense just kind of figured it out.
Yeah, I mean, so the similarities, as we mentioned, so like you said, same result through 3 games, a 2-1 lead for the team that ultimately loses a series. Both series go the same length in terms of games played.
Yep.
Both clinching games had the same final score.
Yep.
I mean, like a lot of similarities.
Both losing teams with excellent, probably better goaltenders in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Right, Shesterkin and Ottinger probably better than Skinner, and
you almost took away like 90% of what I was going to say in terms of like bringing up the Edmonton defense and what they were able to do or whatnot. But I have one other caveat that was really the turning point for me.
Okay,
because he brought up everything through game 3. Game 3, Dallas has the 2-1 lead in the series. Kind of got a wild game 3, which was very much like what happened on the other side. And then to me, Dallas lost the series in game 4.
Yeah.
They had a 2-0 lead on the road, 5.5 minutes in.
And they looked good too.
Well, they did. So the line I kept having run through my head as I watched this series was, what's the deal with one team not wanting to start on time? Because practically every game until the last one, somebody didn't show up for the first period, or at least had a stretch where you were massively outplayed.
Right.
And I just didn't get it. And that's another example. Game 4, it was all Dallas in the beginning. They had 2 goals before Edmonton had a shot.
Yep.
And you're looking at that going, oh boy, that's the Dallas Stars team that I had picked. Like, I picked that team to win the cup, and I'm looking at that and I'm going, they are on a mission. They look so much better on the road.
Oh.
They're setting this thing up great. And as soon as you let the thing about the Edmonton Oilers, as soon as you let that team feel it a little bit because of the types of players they have, they will.
Just goes, zoom.
And it didn't even have, in game 4, that's maybe the best part, and one of the biggest things that to Edmonton's credit is yes, it was a little, because yes, he steps on the ice, he's a presence. So McDavid gets out there. Yes, you have to pay attention. But it's not him scoring the goals, and it wasn't Draisaitl, and it wasn't Zach Hyman. It wasn't one of those guys. Who got the first goal to get the Oilers back on the board in that game? Ryan McLeod.
Yep, huge goal.
Assisted by Corey Perry and Darnell Nurse, who 2 days earlier, when the series, was when it went to 2-1 Dallas in the series, was getting put through the ringer for his defensive play.
They had the torches and pitchforks ready.
Right. And then that general group of players helps you tie the game. And then you get to the second period, you're in a tie game, it's 2-2. Dallas has been good in the game at different points. Now Edmonton's been pushing a little bit, and Dallas gets a power play. And this turns the whole thing upside down because they get a shorthanded goal from Matthias Janmark.
Yep.
Look at the depth again. Like, that's a big deal.
Yep. Well, and speaking of depth, Dallas does take a pretty massive hit losing Roope Hintz for most of the series there
in the beginning, and then once he came back, it was kind of like, what shape is he even in?
You really saw it in game 4, 5, 6. Like, he was banged up.
I thought especially watching 5 and 6, like 4, you think the adrenaline's gonna run, and then to be honest, the way they started that game, even though he may not be having the biggest impact playing, it's like, well, the team's got to lift, so. Right. Sure, who cares? He doesn't have to play his best if everybody else plays great.
Yep. Well, and Wyatt Johnson continued to look great.
Yeah.
Like, there's definitely great things to look forward to with this Dallas team. Like, you're going to lose a couple of your big guys, right? Like, it looks like Joe Pavelski is going to leave. I don't know if they're going to be able to afford Chris Tanev, things along those lines. Yeah. Like, it's not going to be the same group, but that core in Dallas is really, really strong.
I do feel really bad for Joe Pavelski that it's going to end like this. Like, that looked like the team that was poised to do it, and instead, and he decides that's it. Yeah.
So, Kevin, on Wednesday, June 5th, 2024, who's the greatest NHL player in history without a Stanley Cup?
Oh, wow. I mean, I feel like I need more time to think about that.
I mean, to me, it comes down to Dion or if Pavelski gets there, because I think that's kind of the standard answer, right? Like,
yeah.
Marcel Dion is kind of the answer, all things considered.
I'm trying to look over at like my wall of Hall of Famers to
Wall
like
of people
figure out.
winning cup.
Well, because most of these guys have won a cup. Although there's one that there's a great player who I don't think won a cup that would qualify. I think Pavel Bure never won a cup.
Did he not?
Well, Vancouver, a little bit with the Rangers when they obviously weren't winning.
He wasn't on
Florida,
that Rangers team. Okay.
But Florida, like he played for Vancouver and Florida. Vancouver, both teams have never won a cup.
I'm checking just to make sure he didn't go spend half a season somewhere and Ray Bork it, but
I mean, if you're going to go on the train of Marcel Dion, by the way, you could throw Luc Robitaille into that category too.
Yeah, but I
think Dion's higher. I would agree. Yeah. I would agree. Let's see. I can't go to the one part of the wall because I'm going back too far, and these guys all definitely won cups.
Right. Okay. I am skimming Bure's career just to make sure he didn't
pretty
go somewhere
certain.
else. Vancouver, Florida, New York. Yeah, fair enough.
Like Bure definitely falls into that category. Do you go with a guy like Matt Sundin?
I think he's a solid candidate, but again,
that's a solid candidate.
I still have Dion there.
Here's the funny thing. It would have been a totally different conversation if it didn't happen later in his career, but because it finally ultimately did. But Dominik Hasek was in that category for a long time.
There. So, frankly, given his age, so was Alexander Ovechkin.
Sure. Well, I think of guys like that you could throw in. I mean, if you're going deep into the career for some guys, Teemu Selanne was like that.
The aforementioned Ray Bork.
Well, sure.
The kind of classic example. And then the Flyers version.
I don't have to look at the puck wall for that one. I can just look at the pictures. The picture of Ray Bork with the cup.
It's okay. If you're talking NHL calls, not hockey calls, NHL calls.
Yeah.
That's top. That's high for me. It might be top 3.
In terms of the broadcast?
Oh, yeah. Oh, Raymond Bork. Oh, come on, man.
Yeah, Gary.
Come on.
Yeah, we could all use some more Gary Thorne in our lives.
Imagine they pull Gary Thorne out for Game 7.
That would be
imagine this series goes 7 and you just everything goes black. Spotlight comes up. Gary Thorne
emerges out of the darkness. That is a great question, though. Great food for thought in terms of that. So now that Pavelski probably joins that group.
Listen, we're into summer shows here, so let us know on Twitter at YWT Podcast. let Kevin know at Kevin_Durso. Who's the best player to never win a cup? Pavelski, by the way, 201 career playoff games. Take a guess on goals.
Okay, so you said 201 career playoff games?
Yep.
Okay, I'm doing myself a favor here. Because I have Hockey Reference open, but I am not looking at numbers.
I trust you.
I was trying to pull up a list of like the top point guys in their careers to look at the names and be able to tell who else on that list I maybe was, because I actually just thought of 2 more offhand, by the way, as a result of this conversation. No, because you'll see how I made the connection really quickly here. So 201 playoff games. He probably had. I mean, you're spanning a very big section.
A lot of San Jose Sharks.
A lot of San Jose games, and a lot of, the recent runs with Dallas had a good chunk too.
Oh, yeah, some deep runs.
It's got to be like 50.
Higher?
Yep.
I'll give you one more guess on that one.
62.
74.
Really? Wow. What a number.
Come on, man.
So by the way,
he's more in the conversation than you think.
So by the way, the other connection, by the way, if we want to have this conversation about players who never won a cup.
Right.
So Joe Pavelski will join his longtime teammates, I would imagine, because Joe Thornton's got to be on that list, and so does Patrick Marleau.
Painful.
I know. Yeah. There's a few others. I mean, as I'm looking, there's a few others that pop up that like immediately I recognize, and I'm like, yeah, I don't remember them winning a cup.
I will say though, I think the second act with Dallas kind of puts Pavelski over Marleau and Thornton in my book. I know Thornton had the first chapter with Boston and stuff. Believe
it or not, by the way, so I think yeah, I'll say. Well, sure, okay, because
And
yeah,
to
so
bring it back to this series, by the way,
yeah.
somebody very quickly climbing the list of best NHL players to not have a cup is Connor McDavid.
Well, sure. So I have two more that I knew I pulled off of the list pretty quickly
Yep.
because they both have Flyer ties. Any guesses?
Okay. Flyer ties. Okay. So
In fact, I will.
Gretzky got a cup.
Well, and so in fact, I will give you another hint that may help.
Okay.
The Flyer tie comes at the end of their Hall of Fame careers.
Okay, so Paul
Pretty close,
Coffey
or
won.
close the end. Well, Paul Coffey won with all those. Paul Coffey's going for what at this point? What would he be going? How many cups?
He might be going. He might be going one for the thumb.
That is, I was going to say it's 5, right? He won 4 in Edmonton before, and then he's going to get his 5th. Or no, I'm sorry. No. He won 3 in Edmonton as a player, and then won again with, I think, with Pittsburgh in '91.
Okay, so this is one for the thumb.
So this would be one for the thumb for Paul Coffey.
Good for Paul Coffey.
Yes. By the way,
him.
But by the way, that is a storyline for this Cup final, though.
Oh yeah,
big time storyline for this Cup final. But
I
go
mean,
ahead.
It's also just a historical franchise trying to win their first cup since Gretzky, right? Like, I mean,
no,
technically since the first year after Gretzky, but you know what I mean.
Well, no, so they'd be winning their first cup since the captain of the team is the guy who's doing studio work now.
And that's fair. Well, and speaking of the captain of the team, the current captain, Connor McDavid.
Yeah, well, hold on. I didn't get the two players.
Oh yeah, go for it.
No, I was trying to get the 2 players from you. End of their
go for it. Go for it.
Okay. So, obviously, remembering fondly because he's since passed, but Dale Hawerchuk.
Okay.
And Adam Oates.
Okay. I forgot Adam Oates spent some time.
Adam Oates, by the way, I believe. Man. No, okay, that wasn't his last year. I thought his last year might have been he played for the Ducks the year they went to the final against the Devils and lost.
Oh, he was on that team. I forgot they got a whole bunch of old dudes for that team. I think they signed like 2 or 3, like just decrepit old dudes and gave them like 6 minutes a night.
But you're pretty much spot on. I mean, the guy who is, if we're looking at the top of the points list, the first guy without a cup is Marcel Dion. So
yeah, and I think that's the clear answer. But I do think there's a real chance, even with ridiculous 80s inflated scoring stats, I think there's a chance Connor McDavid ends up there. So if he doesn't get a cup now theoretically ever,
it is also pretty impressive to see the number of guys on this list that you can count that you go only have one. Like,
can you filter by active?
I don't know if you can filter it. It does highlight who's active.
Okay.
Why are you looking for a guy who's active?
I'm just curious who the top 2 or 3 active point getters are without cups.
Oh boy, I just found the answer.
Okay.
So let's see. I'm scrolling through the active players, and right away at the top of the points listed among the actives, Crosby, Ovechkin. Okay, done. We just talked about that.
Cups, right?
Third on the list is Malkin. So yep, been there, done that too, right? Right behind Malkin is Patrick Kane. Also been there, done that.
Check. Frankly,
fifth on the list is Andrzej Kopitar. Check that one off.
Check.
6th on the list among actives is Steven Stamkos. Check that one off.
Check.
And then I found Joe Pavelski. Okay, so Joe Pavelski comes off the list.
Yep.
Do you know who is right behind Joe Pavelski in points that would then become this guy?
Would that be Claude Giroux?
Yes.
Okay.
It's Claude Giroux.
Oh no.
For what it's worth, because this one doesn't count. He checks the box too. Eric Stahl's next on the active list, although I don't know if he's actively really playing as much anymore.
Yeah.
The next guy on the list, this is fascinating.
Okay.
The next active player behind Claude Giroux who doesn't have a cup.
Give me one quick shot at it.
Go ahead.
What conference?
East.
Metro?
No.
Okay. Is it Austin Matthews? Or would it be John Tavares then?
It's John Tavares.
Okay, Okay.
The captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs who has to deal with with that. Yeah, exactly.
That's funny.
Actually, you want to finish the segue off perfectly?
Okay.
If Pavelski's considered retired, which I guess I don't think it's official yet, so I guess technically he's active. and Claude Giroux is next on the list, and then John Tavares is the next one. The next player down the list active who wouldn't have a cup is Connor McDavid.
And he's way younger than the rest of those guys. That's hilarious. Okay.
You realize we're talking about Connor McDavid 1,000 points next season.
Oh, I know. But he's also like 6 or 7 years younger than the rest of the guys we're talking about. It's just so funny how he's going to very quickly start climbing like NHL lists, and the active lists are going to be irrelevant because they're all just going to be him. Yeah. It's going to be there sooner rather than later. So regardless, it is going to be nice to see him in the Stanley Cup Final. It'll be nice to see a marquee matchup. The national exposure, ABC, ESPN, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
Et cetera.
So we actually talked about the series? Well, we
did a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, so we want to get to the final preview.
Yeah, let's get to the final here. So it is the Florida Panthers against the Edmonton Oilers in the Stanley Cup Final. And the Edmonton Oilers have home ice, right? This starts in Edmonton, right?
No, it starts in Florida.
Oh, this is in Florida? Oh.
Yes.
Ooh. Okay. So the Florida Panthers have home ice here. The first 2 games will be in Sunrise. Game 1 is Saturday night. What do you think? Like, I mean, obviously we've watched these teams go through it all to get here. I think there's a real chance we have the 2 best teams, which is nice because that's not always the case. We talk a lot about the NHL playoffs being a grind and a slog and a battle of attrition in a lot of ways. And
yeah,
we got the 2 best teams here come hell or high water. You know, you can make a case for Dallas, but we got pretty darn close.
So I was never that high on Edmonton. I didn't sit there and consider them a non-contender at all. Like let's be real. From the very beginning, I had them in the conference final. I'm sure, like, I kind of can't turn that into, well, gee, I can't see you making a cup final. You know, like there were others that I think among the group, like I think I probably had Dallas, Colorado, and Edmonton were probably my top 3 to be the West representative in this. And probably my top 3 on the other side were Rangers, Hurricanes, Panthers.
Okay.
And that was about as like I kind of left myself with room to swap out somebody in case something didn't go the way I expected it to get to the conference final, you know, or whatever. The storylines in this are phenomenal.
Oh,
you have either Canada's cup drought could be over after 31 years. Edmonton last went to a cup final in 2006. They last won in 1990. Florida has never won a cup. It's McDavid's first cup final. There's plenty of reasons to watch right there.
Paul Maurice has 4,000 games coached. Chris Knobloch has 70.
Yeah, no kidding.
Crazy.
So, and I feel like you want me to jump into the.
Let's dive into the analysis.
The prediction.
Here.
Well, or no, I mean the prediction part. Yeah. I don't need to reveal just yet.
Okay.
But I have, like, one of the things I've seen, like, effective immediately is, like, everybody jumped to not only Panthers to win, but like Panthers to do this quickly, kind of, in a way.
Okay.
I've seen a lot of people who looked immediately and went, well, Florida's just going to have a field day here or something like that. You know what I mean? And I guess I'll spoil this part of it. I won't say everything just yet, but I am picking the Panthers to win because for this reason alone. Honestly, I always had them in this position to be in the final. I didn't pick them to win the cup, but I had them going. And if my pick to win the cup is not going to be there, then I'm going to go to the other side and say, okay, you are there.
Your logic got you there.
I will follow through on that. I am absolutely not discounting the possibility that Connor McDavid just wins this thing straight up by himself.
He's going to come out with just pure white hair and just go absolutely Super Saiyan this
entire
he's that good. Series. Yep.
And with a little bit more of a supporting cast right now, you think about how beyond Draisaitl, they're actually getting a
Zach
lot more
Hyman. You have Evander Kane contributing. You have Evan Bouchard on the back end. You have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins playing really well.
There's the third one. I was going to say, I had Nugent-Hopkins, Hyman, Bouchard. You don't get hard-hitting analysis quite like this anywhere else. Don't take penalties.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Is it because their penalty? Is it because their power play is like 44% or whatever it is
well,
this
right, like,
playoffs?
right. Don't take penalties. Their power play is going to get you at some
It's
point.
stupid.
Now
It's the Stanley Cup Finals. There won't be penalties.
We'll see. Sometimes they may have no choice but to call something if Connor McDavid is like
Slashed in the face and
well,
bleeding.
just putting a move on that nobody can stop unless you absolutely take him out.
That's fair.
And you really have no choice. Everybody in the world will be able to see it's a penalty.
We'll see.
The one thing I will give them, honestly, their penalty kill has been outstanding. Their penalty kill has been really, really good. And if they continue to get the goaltending, which to me was their biggest weakness. I mean, we're talking about a guy in Stuart Skinner who the previous series was literally being questioned for his ability to carry them through a series.
Well, and
he was on the bench.
I was going to say, and he lost his job.
You turned to Cal Pickard
in the playoffs,
in the middle of the playoffs,
with prime Connor McDavid,
in a series that you were trailing 2-1 to get it back even, and then when he lost Game 5, you had to go back to the other guy and say win both.
With Connor McDavid in his prime and 14 months away from being a UFA, and you're gonna pull this nonsense, okay?
Right. So
anyway,
but all that stuff, like there is a tough team to pick against because there's elements where we've done this over the years with Vegas. Didn't really. I mean, if the closest guy Vegas had was Eichel in terms of like, here's the guy,
the Uber guy, right?
Well, like the guy that you're going to put the most focus on in terms of it's finally going to happen for him. The year before that, we did it with McKinnon, and it was look at how long McKinnon's been around with this team.
McKinnon's going to get his cup.
And as much as you could do it with Landeskog too, well, because he was playing in the whole playoff too, McKinnon was the star, and we knew he was the star. And then the year before was a repeat winner, but in 2020 when it was Tampa,
it was Stamkos and Kucherov getting there first, right?
But it was primarily
Stamkos, yeah,
because it was like he's been around even longer, and it's gonna finally happen. It's gonna finally be his time, and I feel like people have been waiting for this moment, and I hope McDavid has, for that matter. Like McDavid kind of comes across sometimes, like when they talk to him, like nothing really phases him sometimes or whatever.
He's like a guy who trained since he was 12,
right? And kind of like a guy who doesn't have much of a pulse because, like, how can you sometimes?
And like I said, I think he's been media trained since he was 12.
Sure,
and I think that's probably most.
We've seen it time and time again. My point is in bringing that up is, I highly doubt he doesn't recognize the magnitude of what's about to happen, and it may just be his time. I mean, you could also make that argument for like three guys on the other side,
right?
Truthfully, like I feel like people would say that about Matthew Tkachuk. I feel like people would say that about Barkov. I feel like people would say that about a guy. This is not even the star, like one of the top guys per se, but I feel like people would say that about Aaron Ekblad.
Yeah,
like, hey, you've been around for the long haul. You were a first overall pick by a team that was terrible 10 years ago, and it's your turn. It's going to be your time.
And that leads me to a fun little question here. Before your prediction,
okay,
I want the first 3 cup passes for each team.
Oh, for each team.
So, where do you want to start? Which team?
You tell me which one you want to start with. Do I at least get the courtesy of looking at the roster?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah.
This isn't like that kind of guessing game. All right, I opened Florida.
Okay, that's fine. Florida Panthers. Gary Bettman's there. He presents the cup to Alexander Barkov. Alexander Barkov raises. He skates it around. He probably yells something in Russian. He goes to hand it off to a teammate. Kevin, who's the first pass?
Aaron Ekblad.
Okay, I think that's the correct decision. I'm a little surprised he's not the captain of that team, just given how long he's been there.
I understand why Barkov is, though.
I don't disagree with that. But it's almost like a Tavares Matthews situation where, but I do think that he is very likely right there. Okay, so Aaron Ekblad gets the cup. He raises it up in the air. He skates around. He takes a little bit of a lap.
Mm-hmm.
Who does he pass it off to? Does he pass it off to another member from the same draft?
That would be interesting. I'm gonna go
another member of the same top 4.
I'm gonna go a little bit out of left field on you here.
Okay.
He passes the cup to Kyle Oposo.
See, I I think Kyle Okposo's your third pass. I think you give it to one more like true blue dyed in the wool Florida Panther first.
I mean,
If that makes sense.
I mean, you want my other option then?
Yeah, go. Who would be your third pass then? Who does Okposo pass?
He passes it to Sergei Bobrovsky.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I would probably have something pretty similar. I might flip the order of those last two there, but yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense for them. Ekblad is a pretty high. He's a good old guy without a cup contender, right?
Right.
Like,
I mean,
he's not there yet. He's not
there's
old,
a couple
but...
others like that you could go with that are in that older guy doesn't have a cup kind of material. Like,
and Aaron Ekblad got here when it was bad.
Yes.
Like, he was in Florida when it was bad. He was the first piece that kind of started digging them out of it.
Right. So by your logic,
saw the ugly of it.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. By your logic, you want to turn it to, although see, it's kind of hard though, because you look at some of these other guys and it's like, they haven't been there for that long. It wasn't that long ago they went out and got Sam Reinhart. It wasn't that long ago they got Matthew Tkachuk. Like,
it was Sam Bennett.
It wasn't that long ago. Yeah. It wasn't that long ago, really, that they brought on Carter Verhaeghe.
Right.
Like,
no, a lot of those guys haven't been there that long. But I think
like Barkov getting it first, like I know he's the captain, but Barkov would have been one of the guys that would be passed to if he wasn't, because
that's why he's wearing the C.
Right. It just qualifies. I mean, he's not one of the oldest guys, but do you do something for Brandon Montour because he's been around for a while? It feels like he's been on there for a little bit more.
I feel like it's a fine line to walk, because it's not just how long you've been there. It's also like how much you contributed to the team.
It is how much you contributed to the team. I think there is also an element, like, because I hear you with the Poso, like I hear exactly where you're coming from with it. But I also think about, it kind of brings the Chemo Timonen one into equation too. Like, Timonen didn't play near as much, but they knew what it was going to mean to him at that stage.
That's a little different.
It is a little different, but they knew what it was going to mean to him at that stage of his life. And Oposo's been through a bunch too.
Well, then I think Okposo either gets it first or third in this situation.
Probably.
I could see a world where you turn and immediately give it, even the Jonathan Taves, like, come get it, Chemo, like, but something like that.
That's also why I go with Ekblad.
Fair enough.
That's why I go with Ekblad second, because Ekblad has been he's completely a Panther, never played anywhere else. And then you think about that was also that Chicago team's third cup in 5 years. Like, they all had their cups already. I know that's true, but like that's what I'm saying. Like Ekblad's got both. Been around for the longest time with that team to go through all of the bad to get to the good.
All of the bad.
And then his own personal bad of think about some of the debilitating injuries that he had and like not being able to right. So like that's natural. You hand it to him. He gets it first. Abso-freaking-lutely every time. And then that's when I start to get to a little bit. All right.
Taking a look to see who was the general manager who signed Aaron Ekblad to his ELC.
Oh, wow.
2014. I'll give you the year.
Yeah, well, I know what year he got drafted, so that's not the hard part. I'm trying to remember who the hell the general manager of the Florida Panthers would have been in 2014. It wasn't Talon yet, was it?
It was Dale Talon.
Was it really? Okay, yep. I'll take that.
Good call. Yeah, so that tells you how long Aaron Ekblad's been around. He has seen some of the worst days in the Florida Panthers franchise history. He has seen some empty seats, let me tell you that much. Holy. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Let's go to the other team now. Gary Bettman's out there. He is the happiest he's ever been because he is handing the cup to Connor McDavid.
Yes.
Maybe in Canada if he plays his cards right, or if things fall the right way.
If things go the right way.
And if it's in Canada, by the way, Edmonton is going to be on fire. Like, y'all thought Vancouver was bad. Holy, Edmonton, if they win, is going to be crazy. So Connor McDavid gets the cup.
Yeah.
He takes hopefully a 4-minute victory lap because that man has earned it.
Yeah.
When his arms are sore and he is finally ready to pass the cup on, there's an easy answer.
You're going to say Leon.
I think that's the correct answer because you have Batman and Robin.
All right. I wouldn't be surprised. The only other one that I can think of that kind of qualifies as both, like where you're going towards with the core, would be to go with Nugent Hopkins, who's been around for a little longer.
I think Nuge is your second pass. I think that's where Draisaitl goes.
That's fair. Because here's the thing: one of my first instinct is kind of always to go towards a guy who may be calling it quits or is close to the end of his career.
Yeah, are you gonna say what I think you're gonna say?
Well, I'm not, because I'm not picking this, because the first one that would come to mind is Corey Perry, but he's already won one, so I don't know if they would go as crazy about that. All of these guys would have never won one. Like a bunch of them wouldn't have. Hey everyone, Kevin here from the YWT podcast. Unfortunately, we ran into some technical difficulties at the end of this week's show, so we had to cut things short. On behalf of myself, I also have Kyle's pick for the Stanley Cup Final, so I'll reveal both for you. Kyle has the Edmonton Oilers winning in 6 games. He also threw in the detail that it would end in overtime. He also has Connor McDavid winning the Conn Smythe. I have the Florida Panthers in 7 games. I'll take Alexander Barkov to win the Conn Smythe. And that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. Be sure to follow along with the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts. Follow on Twitter at YWT Podcast. And you can follow along and listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, sportstalkphilly.com. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube to be able to watch the show. And that's going to do it. We'll be back with a new episode sometime after the Stanley Cup Final is over. Could be on the earlier end if we get a shorter series, but if the series runs pretty long, we may be back on the heels of both the Stanley Cup being awarded and the start of all the offseason activity, the NHL draft and free agency. So until next time, we'll see you.